This program is rated PG and may contain mature subject matter. Viewer discretion is advised.
Throughout time, one mysterious substance has shaped the human adventure like no other.
It is strong, it is workable, it can be formed in almost any shape imaginable.
It's a material we use to cure disease, explore the universe, and create artistic masterpieces.
We use it in absolutely everything. Look in your kitchen, medical objects, in telecommunications.
This commonplace material is anything but ordinary.
It's kind of a solid, it's kind of a liquid. It's almost a magical kind of substance.
It's everywhere you look, but we see right through it.
It improves people's productivity and quality of life.
This amazing material is glass.
Humans have been so innovative with glass that a lot of the ways in which we use it are almost invisible today.
We've made glass for centuries, but still don't fully understand what it is.
One of the interesting things about glass is that it slowly gives up its secrets, but it never gives up its mystery.
Today, we're going to celebrate the stunning beauty and amazing scientific uses of glass by imagining a world without it. We're conducting a thought experiment and removing glass from the most important and fundamental roles it plays in art, science, and technology.
If glass disappeared, our modern world would grind to a halt.
This is History Erased, the world without glass. Humans have relied on glass for thousands of years. Despite its omnipresence around us, glass remains a mysterious substance.
One of the fascinating things is that we still don't really know how to define glass.
We think of glass as solid, but it's a solid unlike any other that we know.
Glass is mechanically rigid like a solid, but has the disordered molecular structure of a liquid.
Most solids have a regular geometric structure. Glass doesn't. It's almost as though it's a liquid that has been flash frozen, and that makes it very special.
Glass is made by melting, then rapidly cooling a mixture of sand, lime, and soda.
When it's heated, you can blow it or mold it into almost any shape imaginable. And once it cools, it retains that shape with great rigidity.
Glass not only was a source of wonder to people, but once we were able to create it for ourselves, it just became very quickly clear just how adaptable and useful this material was.
Today, as we begin our thought experiment, we're going to follow this shopper going about her day and this team of researchers at a hospital laboratory to see firsthand the massive effects glass-based technologies have in our lives and throughout the world. The first glass that early humans used was a naturally occurring glass called obsidian, forged by volcanic heat.
In an age where people are making tools out of stone, obsidian represents a huge advancement in that the material can be shaped into very, very sharp blades.
Tools made of natural glass helped kickstart civilization, but the exact origins of human-made glass remain a mystery.
Most likely it was somewhere in the Middle East.
We know that it was being manufactured in Egypt at the very beginning of the Middle Bronze Age.
The earliest human-made glass artifacts ever found are decorative glass beads manufactured around 3500 BC. Over the next 2,000 years, civilizations along the eastern Mediterranean coast honed their glass-making skills.
The first half of the history of glass, roughly 2,000 years, glass is a luxury good. It's the stuff of kings and pharaohs and used for decorative objects.
They had an endless supply of the raw material, sand, and the raw material was made into ingots, which were then traded around the entire Eastern Mediterranean.
glass became a highly prized commodity, traded across the known world. In the 1st century BC, a stunning breakthrough along the shores of Roman Syria transformed the future of glass.
A pipe is used to gather molten glass out of a pot, and the person blows into it, and glass blowing is invented. Every person blowing glass today on the planet could draw a direct line to that original glass blower.
The innovation of glass blowing allows humans to make objects quickly and relatively inexpensively.
The Roman Empire spread glass-blowing technology throughout its ever-expanding territory.
The value was not so much in the material anymore, but it was the craftsmanship.
In ancient cultures, glass was a mechanism for status display.
From cameo vases to cage cups, the Romans crafted intricate glass masterpieces to project their wealth, inspiring generations of glassmakers to come.
They were just technical tour de forces.
Glass made by Romans was unrivaled for centuries, until 13th century Venice emerged as a glass-making superpower. But demand for its fine glass came with problems.
Glass furnaces are hot, and occasionally they catch on fire. And in a closely packed city like Venice, that is a liability.
In 1291, the Venice government banned glass-making furnaces from central Venice and moved them to the nearby island of Murano.
That's where the tradition continued for hundreds of years, and even today it's still a very important center for glass.
The master glass blowers of Murano became revered throughout Europe.
It's a burst of creativity and invention that really set the gold standard for technique.
Glassmaking in Murano was a secretive thing. Up until the 20th century, very few people had access to that knowledge.
In 1968, celebrated glass sculptor Dale Chihuly immersed himself in the art of Murano glassblowing and then shared its beauty with the world.
He was one of the artists that went to Murano to meet the masters of glassmaking.
I remember when I first saw a piece of work by Chihuly, and it absolutely changed my life. It is at once so strong and everlasting, and at the same time so fragile and delicate.
The vibrant colored glassware we love today owes its existence to ancient glassmakers who experimented by adding metallic oxides to molten glass.
The spectrum that they could create was way bigger than the spectrum you can create with paints. The intensity of the color was way bigger than the intensity that you will ever get with painting on a canvas or on a wall.
A new art form, the stained glass window, was born.
In the late Middle Ages, much of the population was illiterate. They learned about the religious teachings through the depiction of these things in the stained glass windows. The fact that light was coming through the windows animated them. It gives them a kind of power.
In the 20th century, early modernist artists pushed the boundaries of what stained glass could be.
And this was really epitomized by a number of very famous figures, including Frank Lloyd Wright, Marc Chagall, Louis Comfort Tiffany. They really defined the aesthetic of that time.
Louis Comfort Tiffany was the first design director of the famous luxury jewelry brand, but is best known for his stained glass-inspired lamps.
One of those lamps was sold in 2018 for $3.3 million.
We associate the name Tiffany with a single person, this man, but really it was a studio of artists working side by side with him.
He hired very talented female designers to do their work, and these women became known as his Tiffany girls.
His go-to person was Clara Driscoll.
Despite her talent, Clara Driscoll remained largely unknown to the public.
Many of the pieces that have been attributed to others, including male designers, were actually done by Clara.
She really shaped the work that was created from the Tiffany studios.
While colored glass had been around for centuries, it wasn't until 100 AD that glassmakers discovered they could make clear glass by adding manganese dioxide. When properly shaped, clear glass has the ability to magnify, which led to the invention of the reading stone.
The reading stone is a solid glass sphere. It could be laid on top of a book, and when you look through it, then it acts almost like a magnifying glass.
The ability of people to shape glass caused them to recognize that you could control the amount of magnification, and eventually someone had the idea of placing them in some kind of a frame.
That was the beginning of the revolution of being able to read small text as your eyes deteriorated with normal aging.
The evolution from reading stones to eyeglasses is an obvious one, but sadly the inventor's name is lost to history. These early forms of eyeglasses led to a worldwide explosion of knowledge.
1,000 years ago, when nobody had corrective eyewear, then its invention is huge. The ability for people with advancing years to be able to continue to be able to read would have been an absolute revolution.
Expanding the amount of time that a person can have clear vision allows for the accumulation of knowledge in a society.
If you multiply that over centuries, maybe there'd be a reduction in our knowledge had the innovation of the glasses not come around.
Eyeglasses have improved the quality of life for millions, including our happy shopper, increasing literacy and productivity. They are essential in our visual-centric world. But as we begin our thought experiment, we strip away the powerful messages and beauty of stained glass windows.
If those windows were to disappear, we're talking about losing the stories that have bound us together for centuries.
And if eyeglass lenses no longer correct vision, driving becomes dangerous or impossible.
There would be accidents, of course, if you can't see clearly.
The loss of optical glass to an individual would be life-threatening.
The failure of corrective eyewear has caused devastating accidents for our driver and others around the world. No longer able to see clearly, millions of people lose the ability to read, operate machinery, or use precision tools. Productivity plummets and danger skyrockets. But eyeglasses are only one example of how glass contributes to our health and well-being. Durable and chemically inert, glass is an ideal material for storing food and medicine in a safe and sterile way.
We use glass for containers for a couple of very profound reasons. The first is you can see through it. And the second is it doesn't interact with the contents.
The ability to keep food from one season to the next without having the threat of food poisoning had a major impact on human health.
Humans have been on the move since history began and need to be able to transport food and drink to survive. Glass made that possible. Today, safe, portable glass containers are something we take for granted.
The ancient Romans used glass containers to transport two of their favorite things, wine and oil. And glass was the perfect material for that. It survived the difficult transport by horse or by ox. It was absolutely integral to the expansion of the Roman Empire.
For centuries, bottles were blown one at a time by craftsmen. This meant that the cost of making a bottle was often more than the cost of its contents.
And so glass factories were just brimming with people.
American inventor Michael Owens introduced a large-scale commercial bottle machine in 1903. With 10,000 parts, it could produce more bottles in 1 hour than a factory of humans could in a day.
The automation of glass blowing was an outrageous breakthrough. But the other thing it did, glass factories at the end of the 19th century were by and large populated by children. This was the last bastion of child labor.
The invention of the bottle-making machine put an end to that horrible practice.
This is a case where automation is a really good thing.
Our woman's accident has left her injured and disoriented. Luckily, she finds refuge from the worsening weather.
Hello, I need help, please.
Shaken and injured, she needs fluids to replenish her strength. Since the first days of glassmaking, artisans have known that glass is a product that can live forever.
The beauty of glass is you can melt it down and make whatever you like out of it again.
And even in the ancient world, we know that some of those objects were actually made out of recycled glass. So the idea of recycling glass is not a new one.
Today, the world glass market manufactures over 130 million tons of glass per year. That's the weight of 20 Great Pyramids of Giza. And 1/3 of all bottles and jars produced each year are recycled, a percentage that continues to grow.
Recycling is crucial because it cuts down on the amount of damage that we do to the planet.
Amazingly, recycled glass can be made into thousands of products besides bottles, including one of the most revolutionary glass products ever invented, fiberglass.
We have fiberglass insulating our houses, we have fiberglass pools, we have a fiberglass cast if we break our leg or our arm.
Fiberglass is used to make boat hulls, automobile bodies, hockey sticks. Why, it's even used in clothing.
NASA created the world's first fireproof spacesuits after the tragic 1967 Apollo 1 flash fire that claimed the lives of 3 brave astronauts.
The outer layer of the spacesuits were replaced with a material called beta cloth, which is a fiberglass material that's coated with Teflon. And because it's made of glass, it's basically inflammable.
That made it the perfect material to use in otherwise high-risk situations, in hopes that we will never have another disaster like Apollo 1 again.
It's not just spacesuits that keep astronauts safe. Glass allows their spacecraft to have see-through portals.
If you put something up in space, the extremes of heat and cold can be gigantic. We require a kind of glass that doesn't change much in dimension, no matter how hot or how cold it gets. That's called low thermal expansion glass.
It provides a transparency that astronauts need to be able to do functions like navigation and rendezvous.
Windows made of low thermal expansion glass remain essential to the exploration of space.
It's our key to having our astronauts look out and see the universe.
Long before we traveled to space, glass drove darkness from our homes. Windows allowed natural light to enter buildings while protecting us from the elements, transforming our lives.
If you don't have windows and you aren't burning a candle or burning oil, in the old days, you're in pitch blackness indoors.
With light entering homes, activities no longer had to be done by dim candlelight. People could now spend more time indoors being productive.
First windows already date back to the Roman times. Initially, they were not really clear. Later on, in medieval times, and especially in the northern western countries of Europe, that's where glass really became important as a protection to the outside world, to the rain, to the cold and the wind.
As glass window panes became larger and cheaper, they changed the way architects could design homes.
Glass is the mediator, really, between our built environment and the outside world. It brings light into our lives. It allows us to have a sense of nature even when as humans we're living indoor lives.
By the mid-20th century, a new glass-making process called float glass ushered in the age of the glass skyscraper. Glass was no longer just for windows. It became the building structure itself.
Float glass technology was introduced as recently as 1959 by Alistair Pilkington.
This automated process could make exceptionally strong, high-quality sheets of glass fast.
You take a reservoir of molten tin and you pour liquid glass on top of it. And as that layer is rolled off the tin, we can cut it into sheets of pretty much any size at all.
Skyscrapers could now get taller and taller, transforming the skylines of the world's cities.
Glass has the right properties that allow for us to enjoy being up high and still be safe.
As this century progresses, glass skyscrapers are reaching ever higher. Where it will stop, nobody knows. But today, As we continue our thought experiment, we remove glass windows from our buildings and homes.
What allows us to live in cold climates or in harsh weather is glass. It protects us.
If the windows disappeared in your house would be exposed to the elements.
The world begins to look cold, wet, and hostile. And without glass containers, food and supplies begin to rot. People around the world, including our injured woman, are left vulnerable and in danger.
No, please don't hurt me.
What are you doing in my place?
Sorry, I was in a car accident. I didn't know what to do. I hit my head.
Let's take a look at that.
Is it bad?
Gotta get you to the hospital.
Thank you so much.
As we gradually remove glass from the world, injuries and illness are on the rise. Fortunately for our medical researchers, they're still able to use glass to study disease and formulate cures.
When we think of some of the greatest medical achievements over the last couple of 100 years, I can guarantee you glass has played some kind of role.
In hospitals around the world, doctors depend on glass-based medical instruments to assess injuries. When the microscope was invented around 1590, glass allowed doctors to focus on a world they had never seen before.
For medical research, the microscope changes everything. You can see the things that act upon our bodies, the microorganisms, the parasites, the bacteria, the viruses. You can start to see what causes disease, and that nobody could do before.
The development of the microscope, it's not an exaggeration to say that it revolutionized the way we think about disease and the things we're able to do about infectious disease.
The realization that life-threatening germs were invisible to the naked eye convinced scientists that laboratories had to be sterile environments with specialized tools.
Our original laboratory containers were made out of metal. The transition to glassware was a revolution in science.
With the rise of laboratory science in the 19th century comes the rise of glassware. From beakers, flasks, petri dishes, thermometers, glassware is literally everywhere in a laboratory.
The ability to make sturdy glass tubes led to the development of the thermometer and barometer in Italy during the Renaissance.
Without barometers and thermometers, you wouldn't be able to do the experiments to gain the knowledge that you need in order to advance the science.
Glass thermometers were the precursor of the digital thermometers we use today.
Thermometers help us to understand temperature in a way that can be measured and quantified, which wouldn't be possible without those glass containers.
In 1887, German scientist Otto Schott invented heat-resistant borosilicate glass. It was strong and could withstand huge swings in temperature, bringing standardization to labs worldwide.
The development of heat-resistant glass was really important. Scientists were able to heat something in the glass container without worrying that it's going to break and observe the reactions that are going on.
This shatterproof glass made its way from science labs into our kitchens. Manufactured by Corning Glassworks, it is still known the world over by its one-word trade name, Pyrex.
The story of Pyrex begins with a husband and wife. The husband works at Corning. Over lunch hour one day, he cuts off a piece of industrial Pyrex and brings it home, and his wife bakes a cake in it. It's a very scientific study. And thus, the Pyrex home cookware that we all know and love is created.
Outside of the kitchen, another glass dish became a crucial tool in the fight against infectious disease. In 1880, German physician Julius Petri developed glass plates that created an ideal environment for growing and observing microorganisms.
Once bacteriologists did that, then they can start working on things like vaccines.
Groundbreaking biologists like Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch used petri dishes in experiments to explore how microorganisms cause diseases like cholera, rabies, and tuberculosis.
What the Petri dish gave us was an ability to study microorganisms, the things that cause disease. And of course, one of these diseases, something that kills many people around the world, is tuberculosis.
In 1953, a young British boy contracted tuberculosis after an early diagnosis made possible by a Petri dish. He was confined to a sanatorium for 2 years.
During that time, nurses and doctors wanted to keep him entertained, wanted to keep him happy, so they gave him a kind of wooden bobbin to play with, and he would use that to kind of drum objects in his room.
The boy recovered and would later say that's where he started playing the drums.
His name was Richard Starkey, but of course we know him better now by the name Ringo Starr.
Her condition worsening, our patient awaits assistance in the emergency room, a life or death facility that depends on glass. Today, hospitals also use glass for implantable medical devices like artificial hip joints and prosthetic eyes. Even medical ventilators use tiny glass wafers as pressure gauges to make sure patients receive a steady flow of life-sustaining oxygen.
Microwave is another example of where electronics and glass have married together to allow certain functionality that otherwise wouldn't be possible. The properties that they bring together make things like ventilators absolutely essential as life-saving tools inside hospital environments.
As healthcare and research become more advanced, glass continues to play a leading role.
It's important to remember the lives that are still being saved because glass is still being used in medicine, despite all the other materials that we have.
But as our thought experiment continues, specialized medical glass disappears.
Glassware is so fundamental to the scientific enterprise that if it suddenly disappeared, our lives deteriorate.
Your loss of that equipment would be devastating.
The ventilator's down!
Get some oxygen?
Without glass, the medical industry would come to a standstill.
Doctor. The loss of laboratory glass makes research and clinical testing impossible. Doctors are no longer able to diagnose and treat illnesses, threatening lives across the planet.
Dr. Forkett, everybody out.
Everyone out! Everyone drop what you're doing! Out of the lab!
Unable to operate safely, the entire chemical industry collapses, and medical research labs become a dangerous biohazard. With the failure of borosilicate glass, this hospital research lab is contaminated with infectious material. And without glass microwafers, a ventilator malfunction leaves our ailing patient desperate for oxygen. The hospital around her is descending into chaos. As our thought experiment continues, we'll examine how glass illuminated our world. One of the greatest innovations in glass is the incandescent light bulb. It changed our jobs, lifestyle, and entertainment.
Our symbol for a bright idea is what? It's the light bulb. What makes the light bulb such a bright idea? It's the fact that it provides illumination.
The mass production of light bulbs began in 1880 and brought safe, cheap, reliable light to the world.
It has a tungsten filament inside the glass container. The tungsten is heated up and it glows. If you have tungsten and you heat it up in air, it burns right up. So the point of the glass enclosure is to have no air coming in contact with the tungsten filament.
Using a glass bulb to seal out air led to the invention of the glass vacuum tube, ushering in a new age of electronic communication.
A vacuum tube is a device that controls the flow of current between two electrodes inside a vacuum, and it was developed in 1904 by Sir John Ambrose Fleming. Without this device, you just couldn't control electronic current in the ways that you need to in order to create electronic devices.
That's when radio came into existence. That's when television came into existence. Those particular inventions relied on the use of vacuum tubes. But again, glass was essential for those vacuum tubes to operate.
Vacuum tubes also played a pivotal role in World War II history and were used to create a device that remained classified for 30 years.
What you saw was vacuum tube technology being used to develop one of the first electronic digital computers anywhere in the world, the Colossus. And it was used to decode German ciphers, which helped defeat Adolf Hitler in that war.
After the war, scientists were drawn to exploring an exciting new field of optical technology, lasers.
A laser is a fascinating device, and not just if you're a cat. It stands for light amplification by the stimulated emission of radiation. In 1959, an engineer named Elias Schnitzer was charged with finding a way to make lasers more efficient, and he did.
By adding rare earth elements to glass, Elias Schnitzer was able to create powerful straight beams of light that could travel incredible distances.
It wasn't entirely clear what lasers would be useful for, which is a remarkable concept given how many lasers we encounter in our daily lives today.
It was experiment for the sake of experimentation. Nobody had any clue. And that's one of the best reasons I can ever give my students as to why we should do experimental science.
Today, lasers touch our lives in countless ways, from eye surgery to DNA sequencing to self-driving cars. And our laboratory technicians use laser barcode readers to take stock of potentially hazardous medical samples in their lab.
It turns out the laser ended up being the Swiss Army knife of 20th century technology.
You don't have lasers without glass.
In 1970, the world was introduced to fiber optic cable, a sophisticated and revolutionary way to use glass to transmit information.
A fiber optic cable is basically a glass tube whose refractive index is high enough that light that is passing through that fiber has no ability to escape.
Fiber optics are made of some of the purest glass you can imagine. And since light is the fastest thing we know, it's the fastest way of transferring the information.
Using amplification nodes, fiber optic cable can transmit data thousands of kilometers with no loss of signal, and in the process, shrink our world.
There are millions of kilometers of fiber optic networks connecting the entire world.
The infrastructure on which first the internet and now the World Wide Web exists is the fiber optic network.
Today, almost all of the world's data, including our hospital's vital patient information, speeds around the globe in seconds, thanks to fiber optic cable.
Hey, can you pull up records for ICU 2?
The internet has made us a data-hungry world, which means we spend a lot of time interacting with glass displays.
It's quite remarkable that an ancient material like glass is still the interface between us and the virtual world.
It is estimated that the average person engages with a screen for upwards of 400 minutes per day, roughly 40% of our waking hours.
The first thing most of us do when we wake up is say hello to our glass screen.
Yes, everything has been accounted for, so I think we're okay right now.
But now, as we continue our thought experiment and remove glass from our electronic devices, our ability to access information vanishes.
Check her pulse.
The internet would simply collapse. We would be isolated in a way that we can't even imagine anymore.
Without our glass fiber-based communication network, emails, phone calls, texts, and tweets screech to a halt.
Without the fiber optic cable, the world of communication as we know it today simply wouldn't exist.
Education, travel, and businesses of all kinds would be crippled, causing a worldwide financial meltdown.
To have the plug pulled on that kind of technology would literally throw us into chaos.
And as glass-based light bulbs and fluorescent tubes malfunction, people begin to panic as they are lost in the shadows.
It's almost impossible to imagine a world before the electric light.
We would literally be plunged into darkness.
we have gradually removed glass from the world, life-saving technology has shut down. With the failure of glass fiber optic cable, vital information that was only a click away is no longer available. Global communication has been cut off, plunging us into a new dark age. While glass-free LED lights still function, glass-based lighting in hospitals, homes, and industries around the world have gone dark. And with the loss of borosilicate glass lab instruments, hospital-wide contamination is a serious threat. As we reflect on a world without glass, it's impossible to ignore the importance mirrors play in developing a sense of who we are.
People have always been fascinated by their own image because we can't really see ourselves as others see us.
Before mirrors were commonplace, most people could only see their face reflected in a pool of water.
Originally, mirrors were made of metal or polished stones, but with the invention of the glass mirror, the image became a lot clearer and a lot purer.
Glass mirrors date back to the Roman Empire, but were difficult to make and reserved for the elite. It wasn't until the 19th century that the mirror as we know it today was mass-produced.
What you see in the mirror, it seems like reality. You recognize things in it, but what's reflected is different. It's not exactly the same.
They almost provide this kind of window into another world. So they have this kind of magical quality.
Glass gives us a clear view of ourselves, but it also has the ability to bring distant worlds into focus.
When we look at the night sky, we realize that there is a huge amount of real estate that we don't understand. We fundamentally want to explore. It's in our genes. Astronomers are the vanguard of those discoverers.
In 1608, a Dutch lens maker named Hans Lippershey hit on a notion. He would take a couple of lenses and put them at either end of a tube and see what he could see through them. Well, he invented the telescope.
That was revolutionary as far as astronomy was concerned, absolutely essential for us to be able to understand the evolution of stars, planets, the universe as a whole.
The more light astronomers can capture from distant stars in the sky, the more scientific mysteries they can unravel.
The undeniable rule in telescopes is the bigger you make them, the deeper into space they can look.
Scheduled to see first light in 2029, the $2 billion Giant Magellan Telescope is being constructed on a Chilean mountaintop. Its 30-meter-wide primary mirror is composed of 7 segments, among the largest mirrors ever made from a single piece of glass.
It takes about 5.5 years to manufacture one of these mirrors. Technicians place 20 tons of glass into the mold. The furnace temperature is raised to about 1200 degrees C, and the glass begins to flow into the mold. And then we spend the next several weeks reducing the temperature so that the glass solidifies in a stress-free condition.
When completed, each mirror will then receive 2 to 3 years of precision grinding, polishing, and testing. The Giant Magellan Telescope will see further into space than ever before, observing planetary systems a staggering 40 trillion kilometers away.
Studying exoplanets and determining whether they may be inhabited would help us answer one of the most profound questions that's come down through humanity. Are we alone?
Humans have always looked for ways to protect themselves from grievous bodily harm. But it wasn't until the 20th century that someone came up with a clear solution to the problem. Discovered by French chemist Edouard Benedictus in 1903, laminated safety glass was developed just in time for the arrival of the automobile.
Your windshield is made of laminated glass. It's 2 layers of glass with a plastic film in between. It looks like one piece of glass, but it's actually 2. And then when that stone hits the windshield, that plastic inner layer protects you from the projectile coming in.
From the beginning of the 20th century all the way to the present day, safety glass in windscreens has saved, without a doubt, millions of lives.
Bulletproof glass takes this idea to the next level. Layers of tough glass and plastic absorb a bullet's lethal energy. Bulletproof glass is used to protect valuable objects and some of the world's most important people. But safety glass also protects all of us from one of the most deadly threats on Earth.
If you think about biohazardous environments like a medical lab or a virology lab where you don't want things escaping but you need to be able to see what's going on, those types of glass are incredibly important.
But now, as we near the end of our thought experiment, we strip away all of the glass that protects us.
Without this safe, see-through barrier for scientists and medical professionals, so many lives would be at risk.
A world without safety glass would be a much more dangerous place.
With the hospital no longer protected by glass, the only way the doctor can save our patient is to evacuate.
A world without glass is pretty unimaginable.
Today in our thought experiment, the world has suffered greatly from the loss of glass.
Life would change for many millions, if not billions of people around the planet.
Without it, it would be a totally different world.
But our thought experiment is over.
Thank you.
Thankfully for our shopper, lab staff, and all of humankind, glass and its many uses in art, architecture, and science are still part of our daily lives. Glass is a technology that's existed since ancient times, but its impact on our lives has only just begun.
We somehow never run out of new ways to use it and find new applications for it. These technologies just keep on coming.
It's a profoundly exciting moment in the 4,000-year history of glass, and we're all right in the middle of it.
In medicine, scientists are now engineering medical glass that becomes part of our bodies.
Researchers now have even developed biocompatible glass that they think they can use as scaffolding for broken bones.
In our lifetimes, we may make contact with our distant space neighbors using laser technology dependent on glass as part of the Breakthrough Starshot Research Challenge.
We're going to do it with little, not starships, but star chips. Very, very tiny light sail spacecraft that are pushed by laser beams from Earth, hitting them and propelling them all the way to another star.
Now imagine all of the world's films, music, books, and data laser etched on a piece of indestructible glass you can carry around in your pocket. This is Project Silica.
Project Silica, in a nutshell, is really the ability to store vast amounts of information on a glass substrate for the future.
The first item preserved was the classic film Superman. Now the Man of Steel will live forever because of glass. It's clear that glass will continue to influence our lives well into the future. With its potential to store information, save lives, and visit the stars, the age of glass is just beginning.
I, for one, can't wait to see the new kind of ways in which we'll be using glass in the future.
Glass has been part of the human toolkit for an awfully long time, and I honestly think that we're only at the beginning of figuring out all of the wonderful applications glass is going to have in our future.